The morning I found the certified letter from the HOA in my mailbox. I was already halfway through my second cup of coffee and contemplating whether to take the snowmobile out for a quick run before heading into town. The envelope had that official weight to it that immediately puts you on edge, the kind that makes your stomach drop even before you open it. I tore it open standing right there by the roadside mailbox, my breath visible in the crisp Vermont morning air, and read the first line 3 times before the words actually sank in. Dear Mr. Zachary Young, this letter serves as official notice that effective immediately, the operation of snowmobiles on properties within the jurisdiction of the Pleasant Valley Homeowners Association is strictly prohibited. I stood there for what must have been 5 minutes, just staring at those words while my coffee went cold in my other hand. The sound of snowmobiles had been the soundtrack of winter in Stowe, Vermont for as long as I could remember. I grew up here, spent my childhood racing those machines through powder with my dad, and now at 38 years old, I owned 47 acres of pristine mountain property that had been in my family for 3 generations. And some HOA thought they could tell me what I could and could not do on my own land. I walked back up the long driveway to my house, my boots crunching in the week-old snow, reading the rest of the letter as I went. Apparently, someone had complained about noise pollution and environmental concerns. The letter was signed by Susan Whitmore, president of the Pleasant Valley HOA, with a flourish of a signature that took up 3 lines. I did not even remember agreeing to join an HOA when I bought the property from my uncle 5 years ago. As far as I knew, this land had never been part of any association. My property sat at a unique junction in the local geography. A popular snowmobile trail, used by hundreds of riders every winter season, cut directly through the southeastern corner of my land. The trail connected 2 major Vermont trail systems and was considered essential infrastructure by the local snowmobile clubs. My family had granted an easement decades ago, long before I was born, allowing public access through that corridor. We had never had a problem with it. In fact, I used that same trail regularly on my own machine. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, Tom Henderson, as soon as I got back inside. "Tom, I need you to look at something," I said when he picked up. "I just got a letter from an HOA claiming they have authority over my property." "Which HOA?" Tom asked, his voice already taking on that focused tone he used when he smelled trouble. "Pleasant Valley. Ring any bells?" There was a pause. "Zachary, your property is not part of Pleasant Valley. Your uncle made sure of that when he transferred the deed to you. Where did this come from?" "Letter arrived today. Certified mail. They are saying I cannot operate snowmobiles on my own land anymore." Tom let out a low whistle. "Send me a copy. I will look into this today. In the meantime, do not acknowledge their authority and definitely do not sign anything." I scanned the letter and emailed it to him, then made myself another coffee and sat down at my kitchen table, looking out at the mountains. The view from my house was one of the main reasons I had never considered leaving Vermont, even when job offers from Boston and New York came calling. The White Mountains stretched out in every direction, their peaks covered in snow that sparkled like diamonds under the morning sun. My phone rang an hour later. Tom did not waste time with pleasantries. "They are trying to expand their jurisdiction," he said. Pleasant Valley HOA incorporated about 10 years ago, covering a new development of vacation homes about 2 miles from your property. Last year, they amended their bylaws to include what they are calling an extended environmental protection zone, which apparently they believe includes your land and several other parcels. Can they do that? Absolutely not. But that has not stopped them from trying. I am seeing complaints filed with the county about this same issue from 3 other landowners in your area. The HOA is basically attempting a land grab through bureaucratic intimidation. So what do I do? Write them back. Make it clear you are not a member of their association, never agreed to be, and they have no authority over your property. I will draft something for you. The letter Tom drafted was polite but firm. It outlined the property boundaries, referenced the deed, and explicitly stated that I was not now, nor had I ever been, a member of the Pleasant Valley HOA. We sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested, and I figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, a woman showed up at my door. She was probably in her mid-50s, with blonde hair that had been processed to within an inch of its life, and a puffy white jacket that probably cost more than my truck. She had that particular expression I had come to recognize over the years, the one that said she was used to getting her way through sheer force of personality. "Mr. Young," she said when I opened the door. "That is me. I am Susan Whitmore, president of the Pleasant Valley Homeowners Association. I believe you received our letter regarding snowmobile usage." I did. "And I believe you received my response explaining that I am not part of your HOA." Her smile did not waver, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "I am afraid there has been a misunderstanding. The Environmental Protection Zone extends to all properties within a 5-mile radius of our development. It is a matter of preserving the natural beauty and tranquility of the area." "No misunderstanding on my end," I said. "This property has been in my family for 3 generations. It is not part of your HOA and your bylaws do not apply here. Mr. Young, I really think if we could just sit down and discuss this reasonably. There is nothing to discuss." "Have a good day, Miss Whitmore." I closed the door before she could respond. Through the window, I watched her stand on my porch for a full minute, her face cycling through about 5 different shades of red, before she finally stomped back to her white Lexus SUV and drove off, spraying gravel from my driveway. That evening, I got a call from my neighbor, Bill Morrison, who owned the property to the north of mine. Bill was in his 70s, a retired logger who had lived in Vermont his entire life. "Zach, you get a visit from some HOA lady today?" he asked. "Susan Whitmore." "Yeah, she stopped by. She came here too. Told me I could not cut firewood on my own damn property because it disturbed the aesthetic of the valley. Can you believe that? I have been heating my house with wood I cut myself for 50 years. She is trying to expand her HOA's authority over properties that are not even part of it," I explained. "My lawyer says she has no legal standing." "Well, she is not just talking. She is filing complaints with the county, trying to get code enforcement involved. Jim Patterson down the road got a visit from a county inspector yesterday because someone reported he was running a business without proper permits. He fixes lawn mowers in his garage, been doing it for 20 years. This was escalating faster than I had anticipated. Susan was not just sending letters. She was weaponizing the local bureaucracy against anyone who would not bow to her authority. The next morning, I found a notice stapled to a tree at the entrance to my property. It was printed on official-looking letterhead and declared that the snowmobile trail crossing through my land was now considered part of the Pleasant Valley, HOA's recreational management area. The notice stated that all trail users must comply with HOA regulations, including a new requirement to purchase a seasonal pass for $75. They were trying to charge people money to use a trail that crossed my property. I called Tom immediately. "They cannot do this," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That easement for the trail was granted decades ago for public use. They cannot just claim management authority and start charging fees. What if I revoke the easement? I asked. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. That would shut down the entire trail. It is the only way through that section of the mountain range. You would be within your rights to do it, but it would affect a lot of people. I know, I said. But if Susan wants to play games with my property rights, maybe she needs to understand the consequences. Let me try a few other approaches first, Tom said. Give me a week. I agreed, but I started researching the process for revoking the easement anyway. The original agreement, which I found in a box of old documents my uncle had left me, was fairly simple. It granted public access for recreational purposes in perpetuity, but it also included a clause allowing the landowner to revoke the easement with 90 days' notice if the land was being misused, or if the easement was causing demonstrable harm to the property. Susan's attempt to claim authority over the trail and charge fees could definitely qualify as misuse. Over the next few days, things got worse. I started getting calls from county offices about supposed violations on my property. First, it was about a building permit for a shed I had built 3 years ago. Then someone claimed I was dumping waste illegally. Every accusation was baseless, but each one required time and energy to dispute. I had to take time off from my remote software development job to meet with inspectors and provide documentation. Bill Morrison called me again on Friday. "They got me," he said, sounding defeated. "County says I need to stop cutting firewood until I get some kind of forestry management permit. There is no such thing as far as I know, but they are threatening me with fines if I do not comply. This is harassment, Bill. I know it is, but I am too old to fight it, Zach. I just want to live in peace." That conversation made my decision for me. Susan was not going to stop. She would keep pushing and bullying until everyone in the area either gave in or gave up. She had underestimated one important thing, though. I was just stubborn enough to push back, and I had the means to do it. On Monday morning, I called the Stowe Snowmobile Club and asked to speak with the president, a guy named Rick Paulson who I had met a few times at local events. "Rick, this is Zachary Young. I own the property on Old Mountain Road where the connector trail runs through." "Sure, I know your place." "Great piece of land. What can I do for you?" "I am revoking the easement for the trail. Effective 90 days from today, the trail across my property will be closed to public access." There was dead silence on the other end. Then, "Zach, you cannot be serious. That trail is essential. It is the only connection between the Mount Mansfield system and the Sterling Forest trails. Shutting it down would cut off access for thousands of riders." "I am completely serious. I will be sending formal notice today." "What is this about? Did something happen?" I explained the situation with the HOA, Susan's harassment campaign, and her attempt to claim authority over the trail and charge fees. Rick's tone changed. "She tried to charge fees for using the trail. She put up notices last week. $75 for a seasonal pass." "That is complete bullshit. We maintain that trail. Our volunteers clear it every winter, mark it, and groom it. She has no right to claim any authority over it." He paused. "Look, I understand you are angry, but shutting down the trail is going to hurt a lot of innocent people. Is there another way?" "Rick, I have tried everything else. She is not going to stop unless there are consequences. Right now, she is filing false complaints with the county about me and my neighbors, trying to force us to submit to her authority even though we are not part of her HOA. Maybe if her power grab actually costs her something, she will back off." "Give me a day," Rick said. "Let me make some calls. The snowmobile clubs in this state have some pull. We might be able to put pressure on her from a different angle." "You have got 90 days to figure it out," I said. After that, the trail is closed. I sent the formal notice of easement revocation to the county clerk's office that afternoon, along with copies to the Stowe Snowmobile Club, the Vermont Association of Snow Travelers, and about a dozen other relevant organizations. I also sent a copy to Susan Whitmore, care of the Pleasant Valley HOA. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone started ringing within hours. Local reporters wanted comments. Other landowners wanted to know if I was serious. Snowmobile enthusiasts started posting about it on social media, and opinions were divided. Some people understood my position. Others thought I was being petty and hurting the community over a personal dispute. Susan called my cell phone directly. I do not know how she got the number. "Mr. Young, I think we can work this out like reasonable adults," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "By reasonable, do you mean agreeing to your baseless claim that you have authority over my property? Our HOA is simply trying to maintain standards that benefit everyone in the community. I am not part of your community, Miss Whitmore, and trying to charge fees for access to a trail across my land without my permission is not maintaining standards. It is theft." That is a very serious accusation. It is also accurate. You put up notices demanding payment for access to a trail you have no legal authority over. What would you call that? Her voice hardened. "If you close that trail, Mr. Young, you will become the most hated man in Stowe." Is that really what you want? What I want is to be left alone on my own property. Stop filing false complaints about me and my neighbors. Stop trying to expand your HOA's authority where it does not exist, and maybe we can talk about the trail. Are you attempting to blackmail me? No, I am drawing a boundary, something you clearly do not understand. She hung up. The next few weeks were intense. Susan doubled down on her harassment campaign. I got visits from county inspectors about everything from my septic system to the height of a fence I had installed. Every inspection found nothing wrong, but the disruption was constant and deliberate. Bill Morrison called to tell me he was putting his property up for sale. "I cannot deal with this anymore, Zach. I am too old and tired." She wins. That hurt more than anything else Susan had done. Bill had lived on his land longer than I had been alive, and now he was being driven off by bureaucratic bullying. I posted about Bill's situation on a local community forum, laying out everything Susan had been doing. The response was bigger than I expected. Other people started sharing their own stories of harassment from the Pleasant Valley HOA. A retired couple who lived 4 miles from the development said Susan had filed a complaint about their vegetable garden, claiming it violated aesthetic standards. A single father said he had been threatened with fines for parking his work truck in his own driveway. A pattern emerged. Susan was not just targeting people about the snowmobile issue. She had been systematically harassing anyone within what she considered her expanded jurisdiction who would not acknowledge the HOA's authority. The local newspaper, the Stowe Reporter, picked up the story. A journalist named Patricia Ng interviewed me, Bill, and several other affected landowners. The article that ran the following week was titled HOA Overreach. Local residents fight back against jurisdiction expansion. The article laid out Susan's pattern of behavior in damaging detail. It included quotes from a county attorney saying that the HOA's attempt to expand jurisdiction over non-member properties had no legal basis. It quoted from the false complaints Susan had filed. And it mentioned that I had revoked the easement for the popular snowmobile trail in response to the harassment. Public opinion started to shift. People realized this was not just about me being stubborn. It was about an HOA president abusing her position to bully people who had no obligation to follow her rules. Susan responded by doubling down again. She sent a letter to the Stowe reporter threatening to sue for defamation. She posted on social media claiming that I was a troublemaker trying to destroy community harmony. She organized a petition demanding that the county force me to keep the easement open. The petition went nowhere. My lawyer confirmed what the county attorney had told the reporter. I had every legal right to revoke the easement, and there was nothing Susan or anyone else could do about it. As the 90-day deadline approached, pressure mounted from multiple directions. The Vermont Association of Snow Travelers asked for a meeting. I agreed to sit down with them at a cafe in downtown Stowe. Rick Paulson was there, along with 2 other representatives from regional snowmobile clubs. They were polite but clearly stressed. "Zach, we understand your position," Rick began. "Susan Whitmore has been out of line, no question, but closing this trail is going to have serious economic impact on Stowe. A lot of businesses depend on snowmobile tourism." "I know that," I said, "and I hate that it has come to this." But Susan has not backed down an inch. She is still filing complaints, still harassing my neighbors, still claiming authority she does not have. "What am I supposed to do?" One of the other representatives, a woman named Marie DuPont, leaned forward. "What if we could get the HOA board to remove her as president? Would that change your mind? Can you do that? We have some connections. A few of the board members are snowmobilers themselves. They are not happy about this situation either." Susan has been acting without full board approval on a lot of this. If Susan is removed and the HOA officially withdraws all claims over properties outside their development, I would consider keeping the easement open, I said. But it has to be in writing, and it has to be real. No more harassment, no more false complaints, no more attempts to expand jurisdiction. Rick nodded. "Give us 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were tense. Susan seemed to sense something was happening because her harassment campaign intensified. I got 3 visits from county inspectors in 1 week alone. Tom Henderson started documenting everything, building a potential case for legal action if needed. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, Rick called me. "It is done. The HOA board met last night and voted to remove Susan as president. They also voted to withdraw any claims over properties outside the development boundaries and to issue formal apologies to everyone who was affected." "What about Susan? Is she going to accept this?" "She does not have a choice. The board vote was unanimous." Apparently, a lot of members were not happy with her behavior. Some of them had tried to rein her in before, but she ignored them. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "So it is really over." "There is one more thing," Rick said. "Susan made some threats during the meeting. Said she would sue the board, sue you, sue everyone." The board decided to turn over all documentation of her activities to the county attorney's office. Some of what she did might actually be criminal. That caught my attention. "Like what?" "Filing false complaints with government agencies can be a crime if it is done maliciously and repeatedly. And she might have committed fraud when she tried to charge fees for trail access on your property. The attorney will have to sort it out, but she could be facing charges." 2 days later, I received a formal letter from the Pleasant Valley HOA board. It was signed by the new president, a retired professor named Harold Chen. The letter apologized for the unauthorized actions taken by the previous president, acknowledged that my property and others were not part of the HOA jurisdiction, and pledged that the association would respect property boundaries going forward. The letter also mentioned that they had discovered financial irregularities in the HOA accounts during their review of Susan's tenure. Apparently, the fees she had tried to collect for trail access were not the only questionable financial activity. I called Tom Henderson to discuss my options. "If they are really backing down, you should consider keeping the easement open," Tom said. "You made your point and you won. Closing the trail now would just hurt people who had nothing to do with this." He was right. I drafted a letter to the snowmobile clubs and the county clerk's office withdrawing my revocation of the easement. The trail would remain open for public use. The reaction from the community was overwhelmingly positive. I got thank you calls from business owners, snowmobile enthusiasts, and even people I had never met who just appreciated that the trail would stay open. Bill Morrison called to tell me he had taken his property off the market. "She is gone, Bill. You can stay." "I heard," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Zach. I know you took a lot of heat for standing up to her." Someone had to. The legal consequences for Susan unfolded over the next several months. The county attorney's office opened an investigation into her activities. They discovered that she had filed over 40 false complaints with various county departments over the course of 2 years, not just against me and my neighbors, but against anyone she had a dispute with. The complaints had wasted hundreds of hours of government time and resources. More seriously, they found that she had collected over $8,000 in unauthorized fees from various sources, including the trail access fees she had tried to impose on my property. That money had never been reported to the HOA board or deposited in HOA accounts. It had gone into her personal bank account. Tom called me when the charges were filed. "She is being charged with multiple counts of filing false instruments, fraud, and theft. The prosecutor is taking it seriously because of the scale and duration of her behavior." What is she looking at? If convicted on all counts, probably a few years in prison, though she might get probation on a plea deal. Either way, her days of bullying people are over. The case moved through the court system slowly, as these things do. Susan hired an expensive lawyer from Burlington and tried to fight the charges, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The county had documentation of every false complaint she had filed. The HOA board provided records showing the unauthorized fee collection. And multiple victims, including me, were willing to testify about her harassment. 8 months after I first received that letter banning snowmobiles on my property, Susan Whitmore stood in a Vermont courtroom and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of fraud and 2 counts of filing false instruments. The judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Whitmore, you systematically abused a position of trust in your community," the judge said during sentencing. "You used the authority granted to you by the homeowners association to harass and intimidate people who had no obligation to follow your rules. You wasted government resources with false complaints, and you stole money under the guise of fees and assessments. This court takes such behavior very seriously." Susan was sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA and to the affected landowners, including me. The judge ordered her to reimburse the county for the cost of investigating her false complaints. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom with Bill Morrison and a few other neighbors. When the sentence was announced, Susan turned around and looked at me, her face twisted with rage. For a moment, I thought she might say something, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm and she turned back around. Walking out of the courthouse afterward, Bill clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good, Zach. That woman needed to be stopped." "I just wanted to ride my snowmobile on my own property," I said. "Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone," Bill replied. The Pleasant Valley HOA underwent significant changes in the aftermath of Susan's prosecution. Harold Chen, the new president, implemented new policies requiring board approval for any official actions or communications sent on behalf of the HOA. They established clearer boundaries for the association's jurisdiction and created an appeals process for any resident who disagreed with HOA decisions. More importantly, the entire experience became a cautionary tale in our region about HOA overreach. Several news outlets covered the story, and it sparked discussions at town meetings about how to prevent similar situations in the future. Winter came again, as it always does in Vermont. The snowmobile trails opened in December after a good early-season snowfall. I took my machine out for the first ride of the season, following the familiar trail through my property and connecting to the larger trail system beyond. At the junction where the trail crossed from my land into the national forest, someone had put up a new sign. It was not an official marker, just a hand-painted wooden board nailed to a tree. It read, "Thank you, Zachary Young, for keeping this trail open." I stopped my snowmobile and sat there for a while, the engine idling, looking at that sign. The whole ordeal had been exhausting and frustrating, and there were times when I questioned whether fighting back was worth it. But seeing that sign, knowing that hundreds of people would continue to enjoy these trails, made it feel worthwhile. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Henderson. County attorney called. Susan made first restitution payment. Check should arrive this week. I texted back a thumbs up and put my phone away. The legal and financial aspects would sort themselves out over time. What mattered more was that a bully had been stopped and people had been freed from harassment they never should have experienced. I gunned the engine and took off down the trail, fresh powder spraying up behind me. The mountains stretched out ahead, silent and magnificent under a clear blue sky. This was what I had been fighting for. The simple freedom to enjoy my own property and to share access with others who loved these mountains as much as I did. The story could have ended there, but life rarely wraps up quite so neatly. About 6 months after Susan's sentencing, I got an unexpected visitor. A man in his 30s, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in rural Vermont, pulled up my driveway in a rental car. I was outside working on my truck when he arrived. "Zachary Young?" he asked, approaching with an outstretched hand. "That is me. My name is David Whitmore. Susan is my mother." I felt my guard go up immediately. "What can I do for you? I am not here to cause trouble," he said quickly, apparently reading my expression. "I actually wanted to apologize to you in person for what my mother put you through." That was not what I had expected. "You do not need to apologize for her actions." "Maybe not, but I want to anyway. I knew Mom could be difficult, but I had no idea how far she had taken things until the trial." I read through the case files and I was horrified. He looked genuinely distressed. "She put multiple people through hell, and for what? Some twisted need for control." "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "How is she doing?" "As well as can be expected." "She is bitter and angry, still convinced she was in the right. The prison counselor says she has narcissistic personality disorder, which explains a lot but does not excuse anything." He sighed. "My father divorced her during the trial, said he could not be married to someone who did what she did." "I am sorry to hear that. Do not be. He should have left her years ago. We all should have stood up to her sooner." David shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I am a lawyer. I do real estate law in Boston. I have been helping the HOA board sort through the mess Mom left behind. They found more irregularities in the accounts going back years. She was basically running the HOA like her personal fiefdom." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because some of the HOA members want to sue you for closing the trail, even temporarily. They claim it hurt property values and caused economic damage. I told the board it would be a ridiculous lawsuit and they would lose, but there are a few people who are still loyal to my mother and want to cause trouble. I felt anger rising in my chest. Are you kidding me? After everything, I know. That is why I am here. I am working with Harold Chen to shut down that faction. We have already removed 2 board members who were part of my mother's inner circle, but I wanted to give you a heads up that some people might try to start something. Let them try, I said. I've got a lawyer who documented everything. If they want to go to court, we will be happy to show a judge exactly what their precious president did. David nodded. That is what I told them. Most of the board is reasonable now, but there are always a few true believers. He handed me a business card. If anyone from the HOA contacts you about legal action, call me immediately. I will shut it down. Consider it my way of trying to make amends for my mother's behavior. He left shortly after, and I never heard anything about a lawsuit. True to his word, David apparently convinced the HOA board that pursuing legal action against me would be both futile and stupid. Spring came, and with it the mud season that every Vermonter knows well. My property turned into a soggy mess for a few weeks, but by May the land had dried out enough for me to start my annual maintenance work. I spent weekends clearing brush, checking fence lines, and making sure the trail markers on my property were still intact. One Saturday afternoon, I heard the sound of ATVs coming up the trail. A family of 4 pulled up near my house, parents and 2 kids who looked to be maybe 10 and 12 years old. The father waved and shut off his engine. "You are Mr. Young, right?" he called out. "That is right." "I am Pete Sanders. We have a vacation place over in Maury'sville. Just wanted to stop and say thanks for keeping the trail open. My kids love riding through here." The 2 children, both wearing helmets and protective gear, gave me shy waves. "You are welcome," I said. "Just respect the land and stay on the marked trail." "Always do," Pete said. "We heard about what happened with the HOA lady. Took guts to stand up to her like that. After they left, I realized that was what made all the difference." It was not about the legal victory, or even seeing Susan face consequences for her actions. It was about families like that being able to enjoy the mountains, about preserving access to these trails for future generations, about refusing to let a bully control what happened on my own land. The snowmobile clubs, in appreciation for my stance, voted to name the trail section that crossed my property the Young Connector. I tried to decline the honor, but they insisted. There was a small ceremony in September where they installed a new sign at the trailhead. Rick Paulson gave a speech about standing up for property rights and community access. It was a little embarrassing, honestly, but also touching. Bill Morrison, who had become a good friend through all of this, started joining me for coffee most Sunday mornings. We would sit on my porch, looking out at the mountains, and talk about everything from local politics to the best places to find moose during hunting season. He never sold his property, and the county quietly dropped all the bogus permit requirements Susan had initiated. "You know what the funny thing is," Bill said one morning. "Susan thought she was protecting the valley, preserving its beauty and peace, but all she really did was make everyone miserable and divide the community. Control freaks always think they are doing it for the greater good," I said. True enough, but real community is not about control. It is about respecting each other and finding ways to live together that work for everyone. That conversation stuck with me. Susan had seen the HOA as a tool for imposing her vision on everyone around her. But the real purpose of any community organization should be to help people cooperate and resolve disputes, not to give one person power over others. The Pleasant Valley HOA, under Harold Chen's leadership, became a model for reasonable governance. They focused on actual common areas within the development, organized community events, and dealt with legitimate concerns like road maintenance and snow removal. They stopped trying to control what people did on their own properties and stopped any attempts to claim authority beyond their legal boundaries. I even attended a few HOA meetings as an observer, invited by Harold. It was interesting to see how the organization functioned when it was not being run by someone with authoritarian tendencies. People had civil disagreements. They voted on things and they compromised. Novel concepts, apparently. Susan served her full 18-month sentence. I heard through David that she spent most of her time in prison writing letters to newspapers and anyone else who would listen, claiming she was a victim of a conspiracy. The letters went nowhere. Most people in the region knew the truth, and no one was interested in rehabilitating her reputation. When she was released, she did not return to Vermont. David told me she moved to Florida to live with her sister. The Pleasant Valley HOA had already voted to ban her from any future involvement with the organization, and frankly, I think everyone was relieved she was gone. 2 years after the whole ordeal began, I was out on my snowmobile on a perfect February morning. Fresh powder had fallen overnight, and the trail was pristine and untouched. I stopped at the high point of my property, where you can see for miles in every direction. The Green Mountains rolled out to the east, the White Mountains to the west, all of it covered in sparkling snow under a brilliant blue sky. My phone rang. It was Tom Henderson. "Zach, just wanted to let you know the final restitution check from Susan cleared. You have been made whole for all your legal expenses and the documented damages." "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate everything you did. It was a pleasure. Not often we get such a clear-cut case of someone getting exactly what they deserved." He paused. "You doing okay up there?" "Better than okay. I am exactly where I want to be." After we hung up, I sat on my idling snowmobile for a while, just taking in the view. The whole experience had taught me some important lessons about property rights, about community, and about standing up to bullies even when it was difficult and costly. But more than anything, it reminded me why I loved this place. These mountains, this land, the freedom to live the way I wanted to live that was worth fighting for. Not because I wanted to be difficult or cause trouble, but because some things are important enough to defend. I thought about that first morning when I read Susan's letter. How angry and violated I had felt that someone thought they could just declare authority over my property. The anger was long gone now, replaced by a quiet satisfaction that justice had been served and the community had been freed from a toxic influence. The sound of another snowmobile approached from the south. A rider I did not recognize pulled up alongside me. "Beautiful morning," he called out. "Sure is," I agreed. "Thanks for keeping this trail open. I come up from Connecticut every winter just to ride through here." "My pleasure. Enjoy the ride." He took off down the trail and I followed a minute later, carving fresh tracks through the powder. The trail wound through my property, through stands of pine and birch, past frozen streams and over rolling hills. It was the same trail I had ridden hundreds of times, but somehow it felt different now. Every turn reminded me of what I had fought for and won. Evening came early in the winter mountains. I made it back to my house as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My neighbor's lights were coming on across the valley, small golden dots in the gathering darkness. Inside, I made dinner and called my sister Rebecca in Portland. She had followed the whole situation from afar and had been a constant source of support during the difficult months. "How are things in paradise?" she asked. "Quiet, peaceful, perfect. No more HOA drama, not a bit. The new board is competent and reasonable. Susan is in Florida and everyone seems to have moved on. You sound happy." "I am. I really am." After dinner, I sat by my fireplace with a book, listening to the wood crackle and pop. Outside, the temperature was dropping into the single digits, but inside I was warm and comfortable in the house that had been in my family for generations. My phone buzzed with a message from Bill. "Coffee tomorrow." "Sure thing," I texted back. Life had returned to normal, or maybe even better than normal. The community had learned from what happened. People were more aware of the potential for HOA overreach and more willing to push back against unreasonable authority. Property rights were being respected. And a bully who had made many people's lives miserable had faced real consequences for her actions. Sometimes I wondered if I could have handled things differently, if there was a way to have resolved the situation without it escalating to criminal charges and prison time. But then, I would remember Bill's voice when he called to say he was selling his property, defeated and exhausted. I would remember the couple with their vegetable garden, the single father with his work truck, all the people who had been harassed and intimidated by someone who thought power meant the right to control others. No, there probably was not a better way. Susan had been given multiple opportunities to back down. The HOA board had tried to rein her in. The county attorney had explained that her jurisdiction claims were baseless. I had sent clear legal notice that she had no authority over my property. She had chosen to escalate at every turn, to double down rather than admit she was wrong. Some people only learn through consequences, and even then, some never learn at all. The snow fell heavier as night deepened. I went to the window and looked out at my land, barely visible in the darkness except where my porch light illuminated the nearest trees. Somewhere out there, the trail wound through the forest, connecting riders and communities, preserved because I had been willing to fight for it. That was enough. That was more than enough. I went to bed that night with a clear conscience and the satisfaction of knowing I had done the right thing, even when it was hard. The mountains would still be there in the morning, the trails would still be open, and I would still be free to enjoy my own property without interference from anyone who thought they knew better how I should live my life. The whole situation had started with an outrageous letter and a power-hungry HOA president who thought she could extend her authority wherever she wanted. It ended with justice served, a community protected, and a bully finally facing the consequences of her actions. And through it all, the snowmobile trail remained open, winding through my property just as it had for generations, just as it would for generations to come. That was the real victory. Not the legal win, not the money recovered, not even seeing Susan sent to prison. The real victory was preserving access, protecting property rights, and proving that ordinary people could stand up to institutional bullying and win. The trail would continue carrying riders through these mountains long after everyone involved in this dispute was gone. That legacy was worth every difficult moment, every stressful confrontation, every hour spent fighting to defend what was right. The next morning dawned clear and cold. I made coffee and went out onto my porch to watch the sunrise. In the distance, I could already hear the sound of snowmobiles starting up, riders heading out for a day on the trails. The sound that Susan had tried to ban, the activity she had attempted to control, continued unimpeded. Bill's truck pulled into my driveway around 8. He climbed out with 2 travel mugs of coffee, one of which he handed to me. "Brought the good stuff," he said. "Fresh roasted from that place in Burlington." We sat on the porch and talked about nothing in particular, enjoying the morning and the view. This had become our routine, a friendship forged in the shared experience of standing up to a bully. We did not talk much about Susan anymore. There was no need. That chapter was closed. But every now and then, one of us would comment on how peaceful things were, how nice it was to not worry about bogus complaints or harassment. And we would share a knowing look, the look of people who had been through something difficult together and come out the other side. That morning on the porch, watching the sun climb over the mountains and listening to the distant sound of snowmobiles, I felt completely at peace. My land was my own. The trail was open. Justice had been served. The community was healing. Sometimes, standing your ground is the hardest thing you can do. Sometimes, fighting back against authority that has no right to exist requires sacrifice and stress and risk. But when you are defending something worth defending, your property, your freedom, your principles, the fight is always worth it. I took a sip of coffee and smiled. You know what, Bill? It is a beautiful day. That it is, Zach, that it is. And it was.